Latest headlines and critical analysis on all things LDS.
Breaking news.
Join D-Vay's
Mormon News Roundup.
That's talent on loan from Kolob every Sunday and Monday night.
We will uncover the truth behind the news that matters most to the Mormon community.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I am your humble host, D-Vay's, and that is talent on loan from Kolob. Every week, my crew and I, we ruminate on the great and spacious beehive, so thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. It's September 1st, and this is episode 130. We have a huge episode on tap for you, but before we get into it, I'd like to welcome onto my program my fabulous co-host, who is the host of the Mormonish podcast, The Good Book Club, and the Mormon Stories Book Club. Rebecca, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great. How are you?
Doing absolutely fantastic. We're going to jump right into the news here. How do you like this thumbnail here? Temple Buster Unleashed. How do you like that?
That is something. I like that. I might have to borrow that. That looks good. Who does your thumbnails? I'm guessing you.
Yeah, I put you in a library because I understand you're very comfortable there, right?
You know, I did get my degree in that field and spent a long time working at the BYU library itself.
Yes, certainly. Now, how do you feel about being called a temple buster? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is an interesting phrase. I've used that kind of, as a joke, facetiously, like ghost busters, but we're certainly not busting temples themselves. We're working with residents in towns who are trying to help the town be able to adhere to its zoning codes, regulations, ordinances. So we're not busting the temple. We certainly want the temple built, as do all the residents in all of these towns. We're just asking them to please follow the codes and regulations. Let the town dictate what happens in its town.
Since you didn't refute it, I will continue to refer to you as the temple buster in chief, numero uno, the head honcho, the buster of all busters. So what is our agenda here this week? What are we going to be talking about here, Rebecca?
Oh my goodness, we have a lot of news. I was surprised at how much news we have. We have temple updates. We have the tithing refund lawsuit review. That has been in the news. Tim Ballard's assault case, back again with Tim Ballard. Transgender policy fallout. That is a very unfortunate, large news story that I just saw today was in the New York Times, I think, or the Post. I mean, it is getting national attention. Also, the LDS Church expansion in Florida. Really interesting story.
Great. Well, let's kick it out right off the bat here. And this is from the Salt Lake Tribune here, just released here on August 28th, 2024. Is anti-LDS animus fueling opposition to a temple in Texas? Shame on the local LDS leaders, Fairview mayor said in an August town council meeting, for stabbing our town in the back. Is this over-the-top rhetoric, or is he being pretty accurate here about the Mormon Church's actions in Fairview, Texas?
All of these quotes from Mayor Henry Lesner come from a sort of a speech that he gave during during the town council meeting where they voted unanimously 0-7 to not approve the application of the church without prejudice, meaning they can come back tomorrow and they can build, bring them something that they can work with and it can be built right away. But this article was interesting because it did take some of the more inflammatory sounding statements out of his overall speech, which was very measured and even and kind, and kind of made it sound like, there's a lot of rhetoric, which is not the case. I kind of have an issue with this article itself. I've talked to the person who wrote it because this person is usually really fair and really balanced and has done other reporting on temples. So the person who wrote the article has said, okay, send me some stuff. Let's see what you got. And I have, and I know others have. So there might be another kind of an article, but those phrases from Henry Lesnar are just basically saying that the local leaders there, when a temple is announced, they know what that will be. They know how large it will be. And nobody said anything. It was very under wraps until that initial meeting where the lawyer came in and said the DOJ is going to sue you. That's the first thing that all the residents heard from the LDS Church. So definitely some statements that are a little more inflammatory. At the end of an article, there's a statement by a resident there. Sounds very nice, but if you go back to his statements at the town council meeting, boy, he was saying we have the money to win the suit and the loser has to pay. Emotions are high, feelings are heightened. I do understand all of that. So yes, if you read this article, maybe grain of salt and maybe look at a lot of different sources. But I do know the author of the article, especially I tried to talk to her about the bell tower. We've mentioned this over and over. The article seems to imply that the bell tower from 20 years ago was passed at height of 154 feet, meaning that because the town granted this to the Methodist Church, they need to also grant a similar height to the temple. Well, we did an entire podcast on that. Others have podcasted about it. The town council 20 years ago approved the site plan, meaning, yes, you can build a Methodist church here, and we don't have a problem with it, but we need to send it back to planning and zoning to figure out the conditions under which the steeple, the bell tower, could be built or the sound of the bells. It was sent back and never went any farther. Eventually, it was built 10 years after the fact. I think at only 54 feet, 53 feet. So it's nothing that was ever built or really approved, if that makes sense. It's very convoluted, as you know. It's almost impossible to explain.
We got to have more bell tower debunking the Fairview, Texas bell tower predicament with Nemo the Mormon. And let's get into that article just a little bit here. Views about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints itself. He repeated, this is the town mayor here, Mayor Lesnar, have nothing to do with opposition to the project. Quote, there have been no negative comments about the LDS Church, Lesnar said, including other community members in that assessment. I'm aware of the church's history and that they were persecuted. That's part of their DNA, I think, but that's not happening in here in any way, shape, or form. Some Latter-day Saints, however, have been taken aback by some of the harsh rhetoric they've encountered from opponents, the mayor included. I just couldn't believe it. Church member Chris Kohner said of the mayor's August 6th statement that he was speaking to thousands of people like that flippantly and disrespectfully. So we're seeing a significant disconnect here. The members of the church there in Fairview in Texas are saying that there has been a great deal of disrespect and of trampling over religious freedom rights. And on the other hand, the mayor is saying there is a persecution complex that is associated with this entire debacle. Who is to blame here? Who's right and who is wrong?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong, but I do know in my interactions with the residents and people there, everyone is bending over backwards to be extremely respectful. And it's almost like the town says, please just shorten it and you can build it. And the members say, well, wait, what do you want us to do? And they say, please just shorten it and you can build it. Yeah, but what do you want us to do? You can see their frustration. And I know the one remark that they're referring to is the one where Henry Lesnar said, this temple, if plopped down right there in our rural area, will look as foreign as a spaceship. He's not calling the temple a spaceship. He is saying this building is so grossly oversized that it is going to be a foreign entity there in the rural area. What I've seen from the town council and the other residents is just a very clear message. This is only about zoning, only codes, only ordinances. This has nothing to do with who you are. And they back this up by saying that that exact plot of land, 4 or 5 other times, they have rejected proposals for buildings there, an office complex, I think a medical building, apartments, I think. It's not that it's the LDS Church. It's the size of the building.
He said that the structure would be very alien in the community in particular. And I know that there's been some lawsuits that have been ginned up here, and you covered that with Radio Free Mormon here. Who is suing the town of Fairview? Is it the LDS Church? Is it Fairview residents? Who has brought a lawsuit to try to get this temple over the finish line? What's going on there?
Yeah, this is such an interesting thing. And I love that thumbnail. We, of course, had RFM on to talk. He is an attorney. And I said, what thumbnail would you like me to use? And he sent me this picture where he kind of looks like a longshoreman. So whatever. I think it's a great look on him. But what's interesting is the morning after the town council meeting where they voted unanimously 0-7 to not approve the application, but to say, take it back, retool it, come back shorter. They received registered mail and intent to sue. As RFM explained it to us in Texas, you have to, at least 6 months ahead of time, if you're going to sue, put forward an intent to sue. So this was not from the LDS Church. This was from two individuals who do not live in Fairview. They live in Allen, Texas, we found out. And the lawyer representing them also lives in Allen. One of the residents suing is a lawyer himself. All of them have in common that they work or have worked recently in stakes or wards there as stake clerk, ward clerk. They're sort of in this union of clerks. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, but they are suing the town of Fairview for trampling on their religious rights to worship. By Fairview not building a temple, these gentlemen have to drive, one of them 3 miles, one of them 6 miles is all they'd have to drive if the Fairview Temple were there. However, without the Fairview Temple there, they have to drive to Dallas, which is, RFM did all these calculations, between 17 and 12 miles further. Anyway, very interesting that these two individuals who do not live in Fairview are suing because they have to drive too far to the temple. Of course, some people have speculated, oh, maybe the church is behind this. Maybe they're funding it. I don't really think that because it seems like such a strange suit. It just seems so unusual. What do you think about that claim of how far you have to drive?
We've already talked about this, that the Dallas Temple in particular has a very low attendance rates. People have pulled the API script out of there in the scheduling application. In a typical week, there will only be one session that is completely full, and many sessions are only 10% occupied. So the Dallas Temple is only 27 miles away, and it is a very low utilization rate. So the arguments of saying that we need one in order to reduce the driving time or because the Dallas Temple is overburdened, they completely fall flat. But can't the church just rely on our RLUIPA on that? You know, we got the RLUIPA out there. Isn't the church going to take this to the federal court and RLUIPA is just going to give a slam dunk and the church is going to win this one, right?
Yeah, sure. That might be it. No, this is why we had to do another 2-hour podcast with another favorite attorney of ours, Colby Reddish. This is actually a really interesting one. You can find all of these on Mormonish Podcast, YouTube, or audio, wherever you find your favorite podcast. You know, RLUIPA is the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And the way the church is interpreting it is that it gives them carte blanche to build whatever they want. And you can't even say that something like a tall steeple is not part of their integral worship. You have to kind of go on what the church is telling you. There are protections for religions who want to build things in RLUIPA. That's what it is for, actually. It was introduced way back in the early 2000s by 3 LDS senators, I should say, in the wake of the Boston Temple fight, where they built the Boston Temple. Some residents fought. It had to be dedicated without a steeple. And so this bill was introduced to be used, I've said this before, as a shield for religions. For example, someone wants to build a mosque in a town like McKinney, perhaps. This law would stop them from completely discriminating just on the grounds of we don't like you and we don't like your mosque. But the problem is, in this case, RLUIPA is being used, as they like to refer to it, the LDS corporation, to build something that does not adhere to zoning or codes. And they're using it more like a sword in many different towns to kind of beat them into submission. And I have a recorded meeting between stake leaders and Curtin McConkie, where one of the stake leaders said to the lawyers, what do we tell people here in our town? They're asking us why it has to be so big and tall, and I don't know what to say. The Kurt McConkie lawyer said, oh, you know, I am a lawyer for other kinds of buildings. I wish I had RLUIPA. RLUIPA lets you just push everything on through. And we have to have this building the size, because if we give even an inch, give even a foot, people will use that as a precedence, and pretty soon we'll be stuck with these really short buildings. Not true. But this lawyer was admitting that RLUIPA, wishing commercial buildings could use that as a very easy way to push things through. What also exists in RLUIPA, and in Texas, there's also a Texas state law that's similar to RLUIPA, which is why a lot of times the church lawyers will tell the residents there, oh, the DOJ is going to sue you. That doesn't really happen as far as I understand. But the other protection in RLUIPA is that a town doesn't have to grossly bend its ordinances and its codes for a building that's extremely large, bigger than what the other religious buildings are in town. And right now, the biggest religious building in Fairview is the LDS Stake Center. So there are protections both ways. The problem is, as Colby pointed out in our episode, courts rule differently. They see things differently. So it's very possible that they're pushing this so hard in Fairview to actually run it up the chain, maybe try to get some kind of higher court decision to lock this in for the millennium. I don't know. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Definitely could be a possibility. Not too sure about that. And also, this isn't the only issue with the temples that has made the news, but we also have the very important here, Cody Wyoming Temple. And the LDS Church wins the suit to build the Wyoming Temple. The judge's ruling with attorney Colby Reddish. This was just premiered here a couple of days ago on the Mormonish podcast. What is happening in Cody, Wyoming as well?
This had not hit the news yet anywhere else when we premiered our podcast on Wednesday morning. So this was just something that I became aware of because I'm in touch, of course, with the Cody residents who had launched the suit. And Cody was really the first city that reached out to Mormonish podcast and said, hey, can you help us understand who the LDS are and what's happening here? And it really kind of opened the door, I think, for a lot of us in the post or nuanced Mormon community to be more aware of temple building and what's happening. So there was a final appeal in May, and we've been waiting for this decision from this judge. It's been months. Everyone's wondered what happened. Back in June, the beginning of June, the LDS Church held a meeting, as they do when they're going to build a temple. It's the first time any of the residents there in Cody got to talk to the representatives from the church, got to talk to the lawyers, got to see a schematic of what the temple will be like. 9 days later, it went before the Planning and Zoning Board with a partial group. There's supposed to be 7 members, only 5 members, I think it was, were there. And they, of course, were being given information on what all this meant by the city planner. The city planner was LDS. And as we found out in the last year, because of Freedom of Information Act and getting emails, he was definitely kind of working behind the scenes, sort of allegedly. Maybe the information he was giving the Planning and Zoning Board was confusing to them. The bottom line is they voted, but nobody thought it passed. They thought, oh, this didn't work. So they went on, they had more meetings, suits were filed, all this stuff happened in between now and then, a whole year. How many podcasts did I do, right? In the whole year? The ruling came out on Wednesday and said, nope, I can't even look at anything here because that meeting on June 15th, it was passed. And that's it. You residents would have had to file a lawsuit within 10 days of that meeting.
Wow.
Now I'm talking 9 days before that is the first time they ever even understood what the temple was coming to town.
Wow.
9 days later, there's that meeting. Within 10 days, they would have had to organize, mobilize, file a suit. Why would they do that? They thought it didn't pass. And also the other sad thing about that is even if the members of the Planning and Zoning Board had recognized there was some irregularity there, they did express confusion. They didn't know what they voted for. They didn't understand because some of the information from the city planner, they themselves could have put some allowances in place to go back and say, well, let's look at the lighting. Let's look at this and that. They didn't because they didn't know. So the ruling on Monday, you missed all the deadlines. You can't do anything. They can build whatever they want. It's extremely frustrating and extremely sad and extremely devastating. And all I can hope is that the LDS Church, seeing how this all went down, that the Planning and Zoning Board didn't even understand that they were voting for the steeple. They thought they were just voting, yes, you can build, which any Planning and Zoning Board will probably say. They were going to revisit the steeple later. I would hope that the LDS Church would say, you know what? I understand this was irregular. Why don't we make some concessions on the lighting? Why don't we work with you guys and talk to you guys now that it's going to be built for sure? And let's work this out. That would go a long way toward the community relations, because as it is now, people are making plans to move. It really is so disheartening, and it never had to be that way in the first place.
Some very good reporting, and I definitely watched all of those episodes of very, very good stuff. Really appreciate you guys over there, the Mormonish podcast, covering all this. Now, speaking of breaking news as well, we have over on the Mormon Newscast, for instance, you covered the new transgender policy fallout that you're on the Mormon Newscast every Monday night. And this has been absolutely huge. You covered that in great detail and also did on the Mormon News Roundup. I just want to play one clip here from Julia over there at Analyzing Mormonism, who's going to talk a little bit about the fallout that has happened since this change in church policy, which has basically disenfranchised transgender members of the church.
My comments and saying things like this, or some other such nonsense about how these new transgender policies are here to protect the children. Let me ask you something. Where are the background checks for the bishops, teachers, and scoutmasters? Who is escorting registered sex offenders to the bathroom? Why does the church encourage that when abuse is discovered that they call their lawyers and not law enforcement? Why did the church excommunicate people like Sam Young who are just trying to protect the children? Why isn't every leader or teacher a mandated reporter? You want to know why? It's because it's not about protecting the children. To me and to others that I've spoken with, these new transgender policies are simply to let transgender individuals know that they are not welcome at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you look at the statistics, it's not trans people who are abusing children. It's cisgender white men.
You know, she goes through all of these white men that have really the ones who are doing the harm in the church. And it's not the members of the LGBTQ community. It's not the members of the trans community, but it's typically white men. And as she points out a lot of interesting questions here that I don't have the good answers to. You know, I've had her on the Mormon News Roundup. You rarely see her get as agitated as she did in that clip. She was quite upset about it all. And this has really led to a great uproar and a significant amount of turmoil, both within the church and without the church. It's even been covered nationally. Apparently, you just informed me that of the New York Times. What's going on there?
Every day it's getting out there more and more. I think it's a huge miscalculation on the church's part to do this. I'm trying to figure out behind the scenes what's happening. Is there a power vacuum with Nelson being so ill? Is it Oaks that's kind of pushing some agendas? That's kind of what happened with November 5th, if you remember, when Monson was so ill and Nelson was coming up behind. That tends to happen. Julia, I think, expressed and shared the emotions that a lot of us do. I mean, I concur with her. When I was a teenager, my abuser, and I don't talk about this very often, was a cisgender white man. Exactly. This is a slap in the face to everybody. And I personally have been reached out to now by 5 mothers who have said, my child and I are finally leaving. The first message that I got like that was a woman who said, my child came to me and said, can we just be done now, Mom? Can we be done? I mean, I get choked up thinking about it. And she said, yeah, we can. Tomorrow's my birthday and we're going to go and we're going to resign together. We're going to go to the notary. And since that moment, a close friend, even though she's in a mixed faith marriage and they'd kind of worked it out, you know, we'll stay, it'll be okay. This was enough that she had to protect her child. And she also went to the notary crying all the way. I mean, these are huge issues that impact people. And again, this tone deafness is absolutely incredible. And it's just getting more and more momentum on the national stage. I wonder if there might be, I don't know, sports boycotts, right? That seems to do it for people. That seems to be how you can get somebody if some team won't play BYU. It's not a good look. How do you read it? All of us, I think, are just so confused.
It's very, very troubling. You know, it made me really question my own membership. I still have a membership in the church. My membership means a great deal to me. I didn't talk about this last week, but I really thought, you know, maybe it is time to show solidarity and to resign that membership, knowing that I will never get it back. That is a thing that I would really not want to do. So it is still something that I'm thinking about. You know, last week we had on Abby Hansen, one of the OG Mormon feminists who writes for the Exponent blog. Mormon Feminist Lays Down the Law. And she really gave a lot of good breakdown as to the church's harmful practices in this. And we also, in that last episode of last week, if you want to know our full thoughts on the transgender policy and break it down in particular, go back to that last episode. But Greg Madsen over there at Quick Media, he's probably one of the most popular conservative members of the church who sticks to the church's standards or ideals, I guess, of what biological gender is. And we're going to have a couple of clips here that I queued up because he had 2 videos on this. First of all, his first video had 50,000 views, which is huge in the Mormon sphere. And then he did a second video, which has a similar amount. He's really kind of leading the charge here on applauding the church for what it's doing. And I've got a couple of clips here queued up that I think will be very helpful. They're pretty short clips, but here Greg says the quiet part out loud loud about fear-mongering.
It fed into a lot of the fear-mongering, right, which I'm sure people are saying I'm doing here.
He literally says the quiet part out loud that he's engaged in fear-mongering that a lot of people are going to say. He acknowledges and says the quiet part out loud. This is the problem with this whole policy, is that it seems to be based on the idea that trans people, you should be afraid of them. And he literally says the quiet part out loud. I couldn't believe that he said it.
That's shocking. But you know what? When you're going to speak that way, you may as well tell people up front what you're going to say and what you're going to do. At least he makes it very clear what his point of view is.
He says that trans persons might be predators, and Greg is not sure.
Talking about transgender individuals. Trans people are not predators. That's not what the issue is. I mean, it might be partly. I can't say it's not.
It might be partly. Notice what he says here. Trans persons are not predators, but maybe that they are. He's leaving doubt in persons' minds about whether trans persons are predators or not, when we know that the data shows that it's people like Greg and myself who are far more likely to be predators than anyone in the trans community.
I would like to hear in the comments, how many of you have been victimized by a trans individual? And how many of you, like me, your abuser was a cisgender white male?
He won't take a position on it. He says he's not sure. Well, do some research. And even the most cursory bit of research, you will find out who the predators really are. And it's typically white men, literally in my own demographic. Okay, here's one other clip here from Greg. He says that trans persons just play the victim card.
Ridiculous. There it is, as blatant as can be. Right? You can see the narrative trying to form here as to what is going on here, trying to victimize them as much as possible.
According to Greg, that's trans persons, they're just always playing the victim card and they want to play the victim. This is the type of sound bites that you get that a lot of faithful members, they won't say it out loud when they're in the pews. But this is a lot of times what they're thinking, quite frankly. Greg, in his entire breakdown of 2 hours, I watched 2 hours of his content, both last week and this week. What he won't do is cite any data that supports this, because there isn't any data. And then he wants to cite the Family Proclamation as doctrine. But the Family Proclamation isn't doctrine. It's not. The Family Proclamation was put together by lawyers, and this trans policy, according to Latter-Gay Stories, was also put together by lawyers. Greg is not a follower of Jesus Christ. Greg doesn't follow the doctrine of Jesus. He follows the doctrine of the church's lawyers. That's who his real savior is. And I found out about that by watching his content. And just one other comment on this. The church's policy never articulates the reason why any of this is taking place. It never says why. And that opens up the door to say, well, what then is the reason why? And the only reasonable and rational position that a person could possibly take, since the church won't say and Greg won't say, is that the church views trans persons as predators. Otherwise, you wouldn't need all these safeguards in place. Now, if the church would clarify it and say, what is the reason for all of these? Then we could have an answer. Until such time as we do, we can only go with the most reasonable and rational position, which is the church views these individuals as a threat, even though all of the data that's associated with it says that they're not. And finally, one last thing before I give you the last word on the transgender update policy. Even if we were to take the Family Proclamation as doctrine, which it's not, what is the good reason, Greg, that we should follow what's in the Family Proclamation? What is the evidence? What is the rationale? What is the data that says that that document should be binding for us? Now, what's your final thoughts here on the entire transgender policy update here, Rebecca?
Well, it's interesting what the national news is picking up on. And they are picking up on the annotation that will now be on each transgender individual's membership record. And it's the same kind of annotation you find on a sex offender, or I think a felon, they said. So you're exactly right. That's what they're looking at. That's the group that they're lumping them in with. And I will tell you, playing a victim card, I haven't seen that. I'll tell you one of the saddest things I saw. It was the first day the update to the handbook came out. And I like to go on faithful social media just to see what's going on. And there was a person who posted, I'm a transgender individual. I have no problems whatsoever. My bishop loves me. I go to Relief Society all the time. My Relief Society president loves me. I participate in all the women's organizations. Somebody wrote under her post, you might want to read the policy or the update. And then a couple more posts happened. And then the person wrote back and said, I'm in tears. I don't know what's going to happen to me now. There's reality there.
Now, over there on Trexvo, you posted this meme that goes along with it. We'll leave on a little bit of a lighthearted note here. What are we seeing here?
Of course, I have my Trexmo channel where I use Star Trek to make a biting commentary on the LDS Church. It's actually probably some of my hardest hitting commentary, ironically, but I have two security guards looking very wary with phasers. And one of them says, explain to me again what this new calling is. And the other one says, not sure exactly. Bishop just said bathroom monitor.
Yes, it's not the sexual predators, as Julia points out, that need bathroom monitors. It's members of the trans community. I do hope that this particular policy will eventually be taken down. Switching gears here, we have the secret lives of Mormon wife stars are disclosing an insane amount of money that they make from TikTok. Stars Whitney Levitt and Macy Neely have more than 1 million followers on TikTok. This is a Hulu production that is going to be hitting here just in a couple of days. It's going to take down the internet. Everybody's going to be watching this thing. And to find out how much money that these gals make from having their millions of followers is insane. That's what we get from this article. Check this out here. Each industry varies here. Some pay more than others, Neely said. And Levitt, who has 2 million followers on TikTok, gave an example of one of her larger deals. She said she was paid $20,000 to promote a sex toy on social media, but that 5-figure number isn't the highest that she or Neely have seen. We've both gotten one. We can't say what it was, but we've gotten a deal that was $75,000 one year, who has 1.3 million followers on TikTok. It's absolutely crazy how much money that these folks make. And as far as promoting sex toys, boy, that's a hard day's work, but everybody's got to make a living, right?
That's true. Nobody ever asked Mormonish to promote anything. I guess if they did, it would be, if it was sex toy, it would have to be senior sex toys or something, because we're old.
I don't know what the market is for that. I don't know if there's much of a market for that.
Yeah, they'd have to be really special. Yeah, I can think of some funny things now that I won't say on air. But it's interesting because when I talked about this on the Mormon Newscast, we all talked about the influencers. Okay, so the church definitely utilizes influencers. We know that when a temple opens, before the open house for everybody else, they have an influencers only kind of a day where they have the people, that have all the followers come to the temple. And at least we saw this at the Red Cliffs Temple in St. George area. And Alyssa Grenfell has done a really interesting video and breakdown about how SEO that the church uses pays millions, if not billions, drives people toward this LDS content. The church has its own influencers that it uses to get its message out there too. So is it the pot calling the kettle black? I don't know. But what I do agree with is that this show, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, is going to break the internet. It's so funny because even on faithful sites, they're posting the trailer and they're talking about how horrible it is. And then someone will say, well, yeah, then why are you posting the trailer for everybody to watch? It's definitely the Barbra Streisand effect, right? Where the more you talk about it, even if you're trying to warn people against it, it's kind of like saying, don't ever read the CES letter. And people are like, what's the CES letter?
I do have that post here from Ben Shalati there at the Lift and Love in Washington, Utah. This was just, I believe, last year at the Red Cliffs Temple here with Mr. Charlie Bird, Ben Shalati, and his husband as well. Today was a beautiful day in Washington, Utah. We were invited by the church to a private tour of the new Red Cliffs Temple, guided by a church authority and specifically for LGBTQ members. The church oftentimes will roll out the red carpets for these open houses. And we saw this in particular in Washington, D.C., which is the church's most important temple. Forget Salt Lake City. Washington, D.C. is the church's most important temple. And who did they bring out for that? They brought back all of the apostles. They brought out former senators, Gordon Smith, and other high-ranking church officials. They brought out Relief Society presidents. They brought out absolutely everyone to give all of these private tours. They definitely use influencers. There's absolutely no question about that. Now, you can find the Mormon News Roundup and Mormonish podcast on Facebook. You can also find us both on Apple Podcasts. If you could leave us a 5-star review, we'd be very grateful for that. Now, transitioning to our next article here, the LDS Church can't use religion to dodge sharing evidence in the tithing case, says opponents. Lawyers for the Utah-based faith are seeking to block discovery in a high-profile federal class action lawsuit, but plaintiffs say the arguments just don't fly. Let me just read a little bit of this to you and get your reaction. The church and its investment firm should not be able to avoid sharing evidence in a high-profile tithing case simply by invoking the idea of religious autonomy, says former and disaffected members who are suing the Utah-based faith. In what amounts to an opening spat in a brewing federal class action case over millions of dollars raised with a sacred donation practice, plaintiffs are pushing back on the church's assertions it should have qualified immunity from discovery early in the litigation. 9 individuals in 5 states are suing the global church of 17.2 million members and its investment firm Ensign Peak Advisors, alleging that top church leaders and their money managers lied for decades about using tithing solely for charitable causes while instead investing investing the cash in a multi-billion-dollar slush fund. So this continues to percolate in the background. We're seeing the opening salvos of this going back and forth with the church, once again playing its religious liberty card, while the plaintiffs, on the other hand, are alleging fraud here. These are known as the copycat lawsuits. What do you anticipate is going to happen with these lawsuits here that have been rolled into Salt Lake City under the auspices of Judge Shelby?
Yeah, I think this is so interesting. And from the very beginning, I have said this is all about discovery. Even before the recent articles came out, I said they are going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that there is no discovery, because can you imagine what they could discover? The article prior to this one that you just showed, it seemed like they were throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them. They were saying, oh, these plaintiffs don't represent members. They can't sue because they're disaffected members, and we can't have discovery because now we're saying we can't have it because it's, a religious institution. They're throwing everything at it, hoping something sticks. But I agree with the article where it says Ensign Peak is not a religious entity. It is a secular entity. And that's what we're talking about right there. So I know there's all kinds of nuance to it, but just the fact that they're fighting so hard tells me that discovery is going to be really interesting when it happens.
If you think back to the James Huntsman lawsuit, where he sued to get his tithing back, the church in that particular lawsuit said that discovery would do undue damage to the church because it would subject the church to outside scrutiny of the way that the church handles its finances. It doesn't want anyone to possibly know how much money that it's worth or what it does with its tithing. And these particular cases definitely want to crack those books open. And of course, if you get discovery in a public case like this, then that information will become public. The church wants to avoid that at all costs. Let us know your thoughts here on the Mormon News Roundup. Leave us a thumbs up. Leave us a 5-star review. Let us know, is this an issue of fraud or is this religious liberty? We'd be very grateful for your thoughts. What is going on with Tim Ballard? He's still in the news. He's so big out there. It says Tim Ballard claims to fight sex trafficking made him a MAGA star, but these women told police that he abused them. So this is the Sound of Freedom hero and Trump ally who won renown claiming to save women and children. He was a hero. And women who have worked closely with him, though, have said that he preyed on them and have watched with disbelief as his star continues to shine. This is absolutely remarkable here that this individual, who for all intents and purposes has been disgraced over and over again. He has so many lawsuits against him, and his alleged fighting of sex trafficking has basically been debunked, yet somehow, some way, his star continues to rise. How is it that there's no accountability, it seems, for Tim Ballard?
Yeah, I think he's kind of Teflon Tim. You just can't imagine that this is happening. And it's interesting. I found sort of an ad for the Firm Foundation. If you're familiar with that, it's like Book of Mormon evidence and things like that. There's a conference in Salt Lake, I think, next month. And not only Tim, but his psychic sidekick, Janet Rousson, are guest speakers there. I just can't believe how everyone is still embracing them as if the last year never happened. Or maybe no one followed it as closely as the rest of us. But I think in this article, which was in Wired, people are starting to notice kind of how close he is to, the Trump campaign and maybe kind of linking things there. So some of this may be new news to a lot of people. Whereas when we read through the article, we're like, yep, podcasted on that. Yep, followed that. So, but it may be new news to a lot of people. Yeah, I'm just shocked. He's Teflon Tim.
And he seems to have avoided all claims to justice so far. There's obviously many lawsuits that are happening, but he has not been held to account in the slightest for apparently shafting people out of millions of dollars, not rescuing anyone. That's the allegation. And then serious allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault. It's absolutely reprehensible. Yet he still continues to be very popular in MAGA, in CPAC, and with apparently Donald Trump himself. Now, I want to read one section from the article here and get your thoughts on Timmy. Ballard is also a defendant in ongoing civil lawsuits in Utah brought up by women, both Boris and Lynch among them, one of which is his personal assistant, who alleged that he sexually abused them under the guise of saving children. Boris and Lynch have filed police reports regarding their allegations that Ballard sexually assaulted them. Ballard has denied the claims made against him, and OUR, which is mentioned in one of the suits, has countersued Boris and her husband. Quote, "This is just a bunch of random details, gossip, and easily disproven falsehoods packaged up to generate some quick clicks," and quote, Ballard spokesperson Chad Colton wrote in response to a request for comment. He also notes that the claims against Ballard in a separate suit have been dismissed. That suit was brought by a veteran Marine who said that she was injured at a training overseas by Ballard, and a judge has ruled that she did not have the standing to bring it because she had signed a waiver. Somehow, some way, Tim Ballard is still out there roaming the world, giving his bogus view how we're supposed to interact with one another. And apparently, with his new organization still raking in millions of dollars, people still prop this person up. It's absolutely insane that he has not faced the music. It's a symptom of our modern society.
I think he will face the music because, for example, the lawsuit with the Marine, it was procedural. She'd signed a waiver. So the judge had to say, no, we can't listen to you. Another one, his wife was taken off the suit. These are not addressing the claims against him. But you're absolutely right. I came across a fundraiser kind of over in my neck of the woods that was actually advertised in the stake he was supposedly excommunicated in, although they later said we didn't have anything to do with that. They just kind of used the stake letterhead to advertise it. But it was a giant fundraiser for Tim and his family. Same kind of thing. I was at work a couple weeks ago and there was a giant sign saying parking lots may be overflowing. There's a big OUR event. So all these things are still happening and people just seem to be looking the other direction. Second anointing, it's got to be something.
Yeah, it's just incredible here that he still manages to fundraise and be able to have some of his operatives fundraise in LDS churches, both in Texas and in other places, even though apparently he's an excommunicated member of the church. I don't know that for a certainty, but for all intents and purposes, we do have that confirmed. People have confirmed that by looking him up in the Member Tools app. But if you really want to follow Tim Ballard, I know you covered him very, very well. We tried to as best as we could on the Mormon News Roundup. Really, it's Nuance Ho now that has an entire podcast that is dedicated to following Timmy. The Sound of Freedom hero, though, has now recently condemned the Mormon church. This is a thunderbolt. So much for being on the straight and narrow. I have a clip here about Nuance Ho and how Tim has now thrown his former church under the bus. Let's see what's going on with Tim Ballard.
He's talking about how much he loves Elder Ballard, how much he loves the church, how faithful he is. He attends every wedding, but I can't wait until the leaders of the church get condemned by God and thrown in hell.
Yeah, he still goes to church every single week, according to the podcasters, but he can't wait for the Mormon leadership to be overthrown. And if you watch his unhinged Twitter tirades, he's still wearing his LDS garments. I don't necessarily talk about that a lot, but he still believes that somehow he's still a member of the church because he's talking about meeting with his bishop, and yet it's the persecution complex because of that statement that threw Tim Ballard under the bus. He is still smarting over that to a high degree back when the church, it was 10 months ago, that said that he was using Elder Ballard's name without permission and that he was engaged in immoral activities. That really burned Tim Ballard's britches very significantly. And he points out in that podcast that we just watched that M. Russell Ballard, who has now passed away, the senior Mormon apostle, he knows the truth about Tim Ballard. And now that he's passed on, he's the only one who could exonerate Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard lives in fantasy land. He thinks that Mormon leadership is going to hell, yet somehow he still goes to church. How people can follow a person who is as hypocritical and absolutely bizarre, it just goes beyond all reason. What's your last thoughts here, Rebecca, on Tim Ballard and this entire saga, which never seems to die?
Yeah, I appreciate what Nuance Ho is doing. I mean, it's shedding a bunch of light on it because there are so many mysteries to this whole thing. I mean, I know one thing that a lot of us have talked about is, does he feel he's sort of on a secret mission that no one knows about? Excommunicated, yet perhaps second anointing, where they say, Tim, you know we have to do this now. But you know, the big picture that he's working under, he almost seems to be acting in a way that he thinks he has knowledge everybody else doesn't.
It definitely could be because of his affiliation or ties with M. Russell Ballard. He could have gotten a second anointing. 100%. And that is one of the reasons that he doesn't really care that much about his church affiliation. That's definitely a thought out there. If you really want to follow it, Nuance Ho definitely is the place to go. Rebecca, can you bring us this up to speed? What is the Mormon church doing in Florida? They're taking over the world. What's going on?
Oh my goodness. This was so hard to kind of go through that I actually downloaded an awesome post. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it because this explains it really well. It's from somebody named Willie Pete. So Willie Pete, we're going to use your post here. So it says, here's the point. This cuts to it. In November, Orange County, Florida citizens vote on a rural boundary change and to give the county power to veto voluntary annexation, which is what the church is using here. Voluntary annexation brings an area under the control of a municipality and places the burden of providing municipal services on that municipality. That's the key there, the burden of providing the services. Annexation provides plenty of inherent good for both parties involved as the municipality gains new land and additional people for its tax base, although not in the case of the LDS Church, right? Because they're not paying any taxes. However, there are also downsides to this expansion. The municipality must figure out how to interact and coexist with existing county services and how this will be funding. Existing residents of the municipality are sometimes subject to having double taxation for the extension of services to the new areas which they are already paying for within the municipality. So it's kind of a situation where, I hope I explained it correctly, they're just trying to say we're going to annex and you guys go ahead and cover our stuff, right?
That's absolutely crazy. You hear about countries annexing things, not churches. I mean, the power hungry, the desire of the church, especially in the state of Florida, the church in Florida, it just wants to see expansion. The church is the #1 holder of private real estate in the state of Florida and in the entire United States, at least by valuation. Let me read just a little bit of this for you, and we'll try to fill in the details here. City staff must review the application before the issue is brought up to the Orlando City Council. So the Mormon Church wants to annex 53,000 acres into the city of Orlando before a November ballot initiative on blocking annexations in Orange County. Now, Orlando city officials must move faster to make a decision. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints investment arm filed voluntarily annex Orange County-based Deseret Ranch into the city. Farmland Reserve has been a landowner in Central Florida for more than 70 years and has consistently demonstrated its commitment to environmental stewardship and long-range planning, the organization said in a press release. Orlando's footprint is currently 90,000 acres, so if approved, the annexation would increase the city's acreage by 60%. That's incredible. I mean, Orlando is a giant city, but if this annex goes through, it's going to grow by more than 60%. That just shows you how much power that the church has. It's incredible. The church really is desiring to dominate the world, quite frankly. They want to own as much property as possible. And with Ensign Peak, maybe they will someday. I mean, it's crazy.
It is crazy. And I'll just read this last part of this post to kind of put a finer point on what you said. This is to do with making Orlando residents pay to provide services to over 50,000 acres, and also at the cost of dramatically altering the lives of all those people who seek a rural life in that area. So yeah, this is a big story, and I think we'll find out more about it as it goes along. Yeah, I don't know how Orlando feels about this.
It's very interesting because sometimes the church does have to pay taxes. So if, for instance, the citrus farm that the church owns in Florida, they do pay taxes on that, even though that is a bit complicated. So I'm not sure if this is going to be tax-free or not, because if it is tax-free, that would be an extraordinary burden to push on the community. So we'll just have to wait and see. This is just a preliminary report. I'm very interested to see what the church is doing in the real estate. And of course, the church never talks really about these moves in its KSL and the church news and the Deseret news. It's always hush hush on these things. We only have to kind of piece these things together by keeping our ears to the ground. And we certainly do that in the Mormon Newscast and the Mormon News Roundup.
We did an episode on Mormonish podcast about the town of Nauvoo. 60% is owned by the LDS Church. They do not pay taxes. The town of Nauvoo is extremely strapped in trying to provide services. It's a teeny tiny little town, no tax base, and yet tourism off the charts. Tourism that does not bring anything to them, because the people that visit there, they stay at LDS, boarding houses. I'm talking about those tour buses that come in with all the kids, right? Exactly. It's been this long battle ever since they built the temple, and now we're building a visitor center there. It's a really interesting, there it is, episode. Again, the town is like, well, how do we support this? And the church will say, well, we're going to fix the road. Where did they fix the road? Right in front of the place they needed it, right? The temple to the other visitor center. So it's a pretty fascinating episode, right along with temple busting, where members of the Nauvoo City Council, they are members of the church, but even them themselves had to say, fine, we're voting to approve the visitor center, but it's under duress. We were bullied. There is no tax base. We're sinking here. Could be similar to Florida, where they move in, no tax base, and someone else is supposed to foot the bill in simplistic terms.
And that does take us to our final segment here, which is the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. And we release new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I was just thinking, Rebecca, if the church is going to annex 50,000 acres in Orlando, this is the top 10 reasons that the Mormon church should annex the entire state of Florida. Why stop at Orlando? What do you think?
Oh, I don't think it's an if. I think it's a when. I'm not kidding. And Nebraska, close after, right? Good heaven.
True. Yeah, the church really started with its land purchases in Florida. They said 70 years ago. It was under David O. McKay who really expanded the church's reach there. And it has done very, very well in Florida. It owns so many acres. It's just absolutely crazy. And, why doesn't the church just annex the entire state? So I'm going to give you 10 choices, and we'll see which one of these you think is the number one reason that the Mormon church should annex the entire state of Florida. What's example number one?
Well, number one would be Disneyland baptisms. Imagine getting baptized in the It's a Small World ride. Talk about a magical experience. There are a lot of similarities between Disneyland and the temple. And
It certainly is. If the church announces a temple in Disneyland, can you just promise to never bust that temple, Rebecca? Just promise that for me.
No,
Okay?
I would let that happen. Yeah, I would let that happen. That would be nice.
Actually, I guess it's Disney World, but you get the idea. Number two.
Number two is hurricane preparedness. With all those years of pioneer resilience, the Mormons would have hurricane prep down to an art.
Absolutely. And since the prophets can see around corners and make you smarter, they'd be able to anticipate all those hurricanes, right?
Yep, I think so.
Or not. All right, number three.
Ooh, number three, alligator missionaries. Who wouldn't listen to a missionary riding an alligator? This is great AI. I love it. That is fabulous.
Which one of those pictures do you like the most? 1, 2, or 3?
I think I like the one in the middle because you can
Me
really
too.
see how they're riding that alligator. And, I feel like we have to say, missionaries out there, disclaimer, do not try this at home. Just because you're seeing this doesn't mean this is something you should try. All of you Florida missionaries who watch the Mormon News Roundup, I know there are a lot of you. Don't try it.
Or how about number 4?
Number 4, year-round BYU football. Florida weather means no more snow delays for BYU games. Go Cougars. That's a good one.
Absolutely. Now, the one on the right there, his waist is a little too small. I've got a lot of envy for that waist size. So I've got to move right along. I don't want to look at that picture very much longer. How about number 5?
Ooh, number 5, swamp trekking. Pioneer treks through the Everglades would be the ultimate youth activity. Oh, wouldn't it?
That sounds like quite an adventure. Or how about number 6?
Yep. Number 6 would be theme park tithing. Tithing could come with a free fast pass on all the rides.
That's one way to grow Ensign
that's
Peak
great.
there. If you pay your tithing, you get a fast pass to Disney World. I think that would increase the coffers quite a bit. What do you think?
Well, yeah. And Mormons love Disneyland and Disney World. I mean, they love it. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, the more land the church owns, the more people buy summer homes there or winter homes there, the more temples are built. And it's just an inclusive all around experience of Disney World, going to the temple.
How about number 7?
Number 7, sunshine state of mind. Endless summer means endless opportunities for outdoor church activities. I can see that would be problematic, though, with having to wear and not, people might be more likely to start gravitating toward this in the warm Florida weather.
Yeah, I do understand that you're on day 1572 of your no cap shirts protest, Utah County protest. Is that right?
No, it's not a protest. I'll tell you why I did it, because I started out podcasting with Steve Pinecker on his show, and his is all voices in the restoration. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew who I was and I wasn't misrepresenting myself, because a lot of people say, oh, she's so nice and friendly. And then I get the sense that maybe she's saying something that I don't think she's saying. In other words, I'm mistaken for an active Mormon a lot. So I thought this shows it. All it takes is like half an inch to say, I'm not misrepresenting myself. This is who I am.
Gotcha. I do like the young missionary tags on these 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
I think that's getting them
Start 'em
started.
young.
But unfortunately, what is that, a habit? That's kind of like a Catholic thing there. I didn't get it quite right.
You know what's interesting? Lately on AI, when I ask it to make Mormon this, LDS that, the women all show up with veils and habits like that. It's really interesting.
Very interesting. Or how about number 8?
Number 8 is citrus sacrament, fresh Florida oranges for sacrament meetings, vitamin C for everyone. Oh, I'm on board with that. I love that.
That sounds absolutely delicious.
A boost for everyone.
Yeah, considering that the church owns the citrus farm there in Florida, they should have plenty of juice to be able to get us all going. That sounds like a good idea. Or how about number 9?
Number 9 is retirement haven. Florida is already a retirement paradise, perfect for the senior missionaries. Yep, I agree with that right there.
I believe there's no property taxes in Florida, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why so many people retire there.
Yeah, well, and because you spent your whole life paying tithing instead of into any kind of retirement savings and fast offerings. So all the seniors, including myself, need all the help we can get. So we need to move somewhere like Florida where we can maybe barely afford to live out our years.
Got it. Number 10. And the last
Number
one.
10, last one, Universal Studios ward parties. Ward parties at Universal Studios would be legendary, and these already happen. No, they do. They already happen.
I think
Youth
Kwaku
activities,
puts them
ward
on in,
parties.
in Utah Valley with Kwaku, right?
Yeah. No, I'm telling you, ward parties already happen at Universal Studios and Disney World. So
Yeah, I tried to put into AI wild Mormon parties at Universal Studios, but it won't do wild parties. It won't do that. This is
no, it'll say this goes against community standards. I
Right.
get that all the time for the weirdest things that I type in. I don't know why.
Yeah. And that does take us to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. Those of you out in the live chat, if you could cast your vote at this time, we'd be very grateful for that. And Rebecca, if you will be the first person to take our poll, what is the number one reason why the Mormon Church should annex the entire state of Florida?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to have to, because I'm of that age, going to go with number 9, retirement haven for everybody that put all their money into Ensign Peak and no longer have any access to it. You might get a little relief in Florida.
Okay, very nice. Number 9, retirement haven. I got it. That brings us to our final segment here, which is the Mormon News Roundup joke of the week. And I believe that you have that for us, Rebecca.
I do have it. And I even copied it here on my phone so I could get it right, because I thought it was a really good one. A BYU student is talking to a friend from out of town. So what do you guys do for fun at BYU? Asked the friend. Well, we really enjoy a good soak with friends, said the BYU student. Oh, so you guys have some nice pools at BYU then? The friend said. Pools? What pools? Said the BYU student.
I knew where this was going right from the beginning.
You knew from the very beginning, didn't you?
I knew where this was going. I thought it might get to PG-13, but luckily you kept it PG.
I did keep it PG. I learned my lesson when you cut several of the jokes that I brought to the show.
I cut exactly one joke ever in all of the jokes.
And it was Landon's joke. And I gave him the jokes. I feel really bad. I made him look bad. I made him look like a creepy pervert, and he's not. So.
I saved him, so you should thank me. And that brings me, what projects are you working on? How can people get in touch with you? The Temple Buster Unleashed. What do you got going on, Rebecca?
There it is. Well, I would encourage anybody to watch the episode that we put out last Wednesday on the 28th about the Cody ruling, because that's really interesting. Coming up on Tuesday, which will be 2 days from when this airs, we have a really interesting episode with Lila Tuller about are women leaving religion more than men now. It's a really interesting study and a very interesting conversation with GA's daughter, Lila Tuller. So tune in for that at 6 p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday.
That sounds good. As far as what I'm working on tomorrow night, we're doing a review of The Work and the Glory. This was that movie that was put together based on the books by Gerald Enlund. It was funded by Larry H. Miller, ended up losing millions of dollars, but we will be reviewing it tomorrow night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also one other thing here, Rebecca, which is I'm going to accept a debate by the Thoughtful Saint here, and I'm releasing a video on Tuesday, 2 days from now at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to accept the debate that Jacob Hansen challenged me to. And what is the subject of the debate?
Is building Mormon temples the single best way to alleviate poverty? Now, are you really doing this debate?
I'm accepting the debate. Now, whether the debate actually takes place or not, I can't say, but that was the debate topic. And let me just ask you before we get going, do you think that building LDS temples is the single best way to alleviate poverty on this planet? You're basically the temple expert on this planet. You know more about this than anyone.
I would challenge anyone to give me one single reason of how it does. Honestly, one thing. Tell me one thing about how.
Okay.
I think he's got it switched around right there. Yeah. There's no single reason I can think of.
All right. Well, we'll find out. I'd like to thank my patrons and our channel supporters over there. It means a great deal to us. Rebecca, thanks so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup this week and for ruminating with me on the great and spacious Beehive.
You are so welcome. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to it.
I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on Bandcamp.com for this episode's music. Always think celestial, and remember.
No unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
We've recently learned that, okay, you're going to have to cut that. I apologize so much. Oh my gosh. We have this wailing in the background.